Evgeny Tchebotarev. Welcome.
Okay. Hey guys, всем привет. I want to start with just a show of hands. How many of you guys and ladies are planning to fundraise or have a company and want to get a venture capital? How many of you don't want any money from investors? Yeah, okay. Some of you want and some of you don't want. So my talk today is actually like a practical guide, basically how you can hack the venture capital and how you can hack it so that it's more effective for you to raise the capital from venture investors and how to do it most effectively so you don't waste the time. So before we start, I want to show who am I and why you should listen to me, right? So I started a company called FireNPX. It's a photo sharing community and marketplace that has about 15 million members as of today. And our company worked with many big companies like Google, Uber, Airbnb, Booking.com, and many others. So they are our B2B clients. And overall, we raised 4 rounds of venture capital, raised 25 million US dollars. And we also took money from Andreessen Horowitz, which is a #1 venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, so kind of like a well-respected company. This year, the company was sold to VCG, so-called like a Chinese Getty Images. And in the meantime, I moved to Asia and lived in Asia for 2.5 years, helping other companies, about 6 companies, to raise their first seed round of financing. So those are we're going to go through the practical steps of raising your first round. But the first question you're going to ask yourself before you take the money from investors is why. Basically, why should you take the venture capital money? And the reasons why, you should know not only how much you should take, but also, do you need it? Can you bootstrap it yourself? Because with taking money from venture capitalists, you basically start a ticking clock that means that over time, investors need a specific outcome. It also is not very applicable to lifestyle businesses. So for example, if your business is profitable but not growing too fast, it's usually not very interesting to venture capitalists. So it's important to know that you have the right parameters to start this process before you actually take money from venture capitalists. So this is what happens when you meet the investors for the very first time. This red dot represents what they know about you. You send them an email, you share a deck, and what they see is a dot. Like if you share a deck and you have some numbers, is it good? Is it bad? Is the business growing? Is it declining? Is it stagnant? So what's important is actually to invest the time in the relationship with your future investors, so that from that dot, you can start building the actual path. So they know what's happening with your business, that it's growing. So over time, they know that you are actually building something great and growing something that's growing really, really fast. In ideal scenario, really fast. Sometimes not really fast. But at least they know what you're going through. They start knowing where you're coming from a few months ago and where you're today, and they can start project where you're going to be in the future. So the first important step to start working with investors is actually very simple. You have to get them on a list. And the list is I'll talk about it in a second, but it's kind of like your way of guiding them and nurturing your investors. So way before, months before, maybe a year before you even need the money, or even before you're thinking of closing your first round of financing. So what's the list? The list is very simple. It's basically an email. And an email has 5 very simple steps, right? It's executive summary. You tell them who you are every single time, what do you do, what your business does, what went well. So usually those are monthly updates, and you share them and say like, hey, we've done this experiment, we've done that growth hack, and it did work, or maybe it didn't work, or maybe we had to lay off some people, or maybe something we got blocked somewhere. So kind of like you share your process and your story with investors. You also share key metrics. So basically, not everything, but something that's important to you as a measure of healthy business and to your investors. And the last part is help needed. So you kind of want to share the things that you want from your mentors or investors that are on the list. And the help needed is basically your chance for a chance for investors to help you and get recognition in the next email that you're going to send next month. So the list basically looks very simple. It's an email, right? You send it to your advisors and investors. And to get people on that list, you actually just have to ask. And it's very simple. It's just kind of like, hey, I'm looking to raise next year. Can I add you on the list? They say yes or no. If they say yes, they have to be on the list. Right? So the list is important because there is actually a company out of Toronto where I used to live for quite some time. They raised $500,000 on their first round solely on that update. Like they did monthly update for 13 times in a row over the course of a year, and eventually investors knew everything they need to know about the business. They knew how passionate the people are. They knew the metrics. They knew the whole process. They knew what was going well, what was not going well. So kind of like basically the whole process was very clear for them, and they had those dots connected in a very clear line of where the business is heading in the future. So for them to invest, it was very simple. One thing to remember is that fundraising is a marathon and not a sprint. And what I mean by this is actually you have to time your fundraise so that you start it well before you need the money. Because it takes a long time to raise, and you have to do it full time. So with my experience of helping my company and helping 6 other companies, it actually on average took about 6 months before you start the process of fundraising and you have the money in the bank. And that process can take longer or can take less. There's some Silicon Valley companies that you might read that raise rounds in like 2 months or 1 month or 3 weeks. Those are the outliers. That's why people talk about them. For average company, it takes about 6 months or more. And you have to plan it carefully so that you time your investor outreach very carefully. And what I mean by this, if you start talking to one investor, 2 investors, by the time you get to the term sheet, the very important process where they actually give you the list of how much they're going to invest and the rules, if it's not what you want and you want to have another term sheet, you have to have it in advance, basically. You have to time it so that all the investors go through the same track process at the same time. Because those term sheets that you get, they're usually timed. So you have about 3 days or a week to decide whether you can accept the investor's term sheet or not. And once you accept it, you actually usually cannot shop around. So you cannot go to other investors and say, hey, I got this term sheet. Can you give me a better one? So you have to time it so that it becomes kind of like a competition. So another important thing for the founder is to know your metrics. And the importance of that is there is a bunch of metrics that every business goes through: the money needed, the retention rate, the expenses, the APRU, lifetime value, and all of those. And you have to know them on top of your head. So basically, when an investor calls or sends an email and says, like, hey, what's your CAC, the cost of customer acquisition, you have to know the number. If you don't know the number, it just looks like you don't know your business. So the founder and the owners of the business, they have to know these numbers on top of their head. And if they don't, they have to start tracking those metrics. So that's very important. Another thing that happens is that you may not know the lingo of how the venture capitalists communicate and all of this, but you have to know the basics of how the venture capital works. And one example, I was advising a company. They came to our office, and the guys sat down, and they're like, "Hey, we're looking to raise." And we're like, "Okay, so what do you want?" And they're like, "We're looking to raise $3 million on 1.5." And I looked at them like, what do you mean? That's stupid, right? And that's because they are actually giving away 100% of their company, and then they're giving their next company away to investors. So then if they came to investors first and said this thing, they would never have raised with those investors or likely in the industry, because the word spreads fast, and it's important to know the basics of how much money you need, what's your runway, all those metrics that we just talked about. Just once again, like all the basics that are key for your business. Some may not be applicable, some will be applicable. You have to know them by the details. Okay, how to get to actually investors. So that's part where it's important to know that it's kind of like a numbers game. And what I mean by this is actually there's a law of large numbers. What I mean by this is that you have to start with a big, big number. It takes about 500 cold emails or LinkedIn requests or things like this to get about 50 replies, right? And from 50 replies, you maybe get 10 meetings. And from those 10 meetings, you'll maybe get one term sheet. And another story I had, I was talking to my friend in Singapore. He was raising his seed round. And he called me once, and he's like, "Hey, Ev, I talked to 3 investors, and they don't reply to me." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, I sent my deck and a pitch to 3 investors, and they stopped replying to me." I'm like, "That's not enough, right? If you start with 3 emails, you get 0 in the end, right?" So the numbers are your friend in that sense. So you have to go, and with another company, we actually did the whole process where we sent 500 emails, we got the replies, we got the meetings, and we got 0 term sheets. So we actually had to restart this process again. Another 500 emails, another replies, meetings, and a term sheet. So that's kind of like the process where you, the more you send, the better you work through the funnel, the better results you get. So how to actually work the funnel? This is kind of like super simple and very basic, but that's kind of like important to know that the first one you can start with LinkedIn, and there's a bunch of Chrome extensions, for example, Scrap, that allows you to get their emails. The other one are lists, and I'm listing one from the CB Insights, that basically there is a list of top Ukrainian investors, top Silicon Valley investors, top investors in fintech, top investors in SaaS products. So whatever your angle is, whatever your business, you can find the top 50, top 100 investors, and then go through the process of finding their emails and finding the right person to talk to. There are also conferences and Twitters and blogs. Investors are usually trying to be public people, so they have to share that they are smart people. So they need to be like thought leaders and share their insights about the industry and whatever they see. So that's another important thing, that you have to start by following all of them, like seeing what they're going through, what their process is, what their thought process is, and things like this. And the how part is basically when you send those emails or cold emails, you have to be personal. And you have to acknowledge their accomplishments, like whatever they've done. Somebody released the book, or somebody talked at the conference, or someone, I don't know, done something, and like you have to basically tell them that you're aware that they've done the hard work. And don't copy paste. More than once, there's VCs that hang out together, they have lunch together. If they get the same email and they look at it, they'll never talk to you again. It just doesn't look good. And obviously be concise and be interesting. So something kind of like you get to the punchline where, what is your business? When we talked to Andreessen Horowitz back in 2013 and raised with them later in 2013, at that time, the company was much smaller. The Andreessen Horowitz was much smaller. They still got about 6,000 pitches every year. And they invested in 50 companies. So from all those pitches that get through them, to pitch to Andreessen Horowitz, they only get to invest in less than 1%. So you have to be concise and you have to be interesting in what gets them, because they've seen all of that. They've seen photo sharing, they've seen this, they've seen that, they've seen all kinds of businesses. So your business have to stand apart and have to find something that other businesses don't have. Just kind of like on a personal note, like this is kind of like of an email that you can send to be personal. Like it starts with the actual name, like hi Finn, and then it goes like, I read your blog post and I found it interesting, and we actually use it in our process, and like we're building the recommendation engine, and we use AI and machine learning and visual recognition, and you make it easy for them to accept it, right? It says like, I would love to arrange a short 20-minute pitch. Usually I say like, hey, I need 10 minutes with you. Even if it's not true, if I need more, I still want to kind of like make it easy for them to say yes and hard for them to say no. And you try to time it so that it's easy for them to accept. You say like, hey, would Tuesday next week or Wednesday next week, these times work for you? And give some way to reach out so that they can say, yeah, let's talk. So kind of like the easier you make for them to say yes, and the better your response is going to be. Right? So what about networking? The networking is another very important aspect of talking to investors. Again, very simple. Those are the conferences, right? There is like a Web Summit that's coming up in Portugal. There is Rise in Hong Kong. There is Collision Conference in Toronto. There is Money 2020. So depending on which angle you are, there's so many different conferences to attend. The conferences are expensive, right? Like the ticket to the conference is like $1,000. Then you have to get a flight. Then you have to get accommodation and all things. But what the conference does, it brings all the people together. Kind of like duh moment, right? Like you obviously know this, but what it means that investors are there, it gives you an opening. You say like, hey, I'm going to Web Summit as well. Let's catch up. Like I'm gonna come where you are. So that makes it very easy to reach out to hundreds of people at the same time and basically network in a more effective way. That's what the conferences are, right? So that's kind of like a no-brainer. And basically, depending on what your angle is, like if you're in fintech or focusing on Asia, you can go to Asia and specific like fintech conferences. So you can kind of like tailor your experience and be more effective by going to specific places. Okay, the next one is there are some businesses that require investors to sign NDAs. And they're like, hey, I'm working on such an exclusive idea, and I don't want other people to steal it. Please forget it. Like, as soon as you do, investors hate this. There's so many ideas. Everything's been done, and there's rarely business. Your business is likely not to be the one that needs NDA. Like there's some businesses that do. They're so rare and far in between. The founders usually like been burned before by having someone steal ideas, but usually that's not the case. Usually just want to go through and not ask investors or anyone to sign an NDA. It just makes the process smoother and you get better responses. So if you ever ask for this, drop it. And the important thing to remember is that when you're raising your round, it's a business. So you're presenting your business to investors. And so it means that you are selling part of your company to them. So they have to believe in you and they have to support you in a way. What I mean by this is that there's many angel investors and non-professional institutional investors that would ask you for personal sacrifices. They would tell, hey, we'll give you money, but can you work for free? Like maybe for a year. Can you just like not have a salary and things like this? And you're like, no. You have to work with institutional VCs that would understand this. So investors that would try to say like, hey, let's save some money and let's do it frugally. Those are valid concerns, but it's still a business. So as a business owner, as a founder, it's expected that you get paid. Maybe not to the market level, but still you get a salary that you can support the family, you can support yourself, and not think about where you're going to eat next time, and instead can focus on the business to be more successful. So it's not a charity. It's kind of like an important concept because many investors that I've spoken to that do it occasionally, that are not institutional investors, are usually have some sort of agenda how to make founders miserable. So in conclusion, we're going to do like a quick Q&A round, which is like a fast round, kind of like a quick question, like dumb money versus smart money. If you can just take pure money, but those people cannot help, it's better to take smart money from institutional investors that can help you with business or open the doors. For us, with Andreessen Horowitz, it was very pleasant experience in the way that it opened business to Airbnb and Facebook and Google and Uber and all the other companies. At the same time, we had a term sheet from investors that were just the investors with money. They weren't willing to help. Usually the best way to start is to pitch to bad investors first so that you can practice your pitch, you can have the questions that I get to you, and you can perfect your pitch for the next time. And then you can kind of like progressively go towards better and better investors. The valuation is always an art, especially on the seed stage. If you're just having just started the product or have like a demo to show, the valuation, how much your business costs, is a random number. It can be anywhere from, I don't know, 100,000 to 10 million. Really matters on how you sell it and what's the kind of like the other people in this industry are doing and in which country you're pitching as well. Again, saying that again, but don't copy paste emails. That basically, like, if you make mistakes, it's really hard to go back from that. And like, if you copy paste emails and you make mistakes with names and things like this, it's really hard to go back and say like, hey guys, or like, hey investor, I'm really sorry, I copy pasted that. It just kind of like doesn't work second time. And I think one of the two of the most important ones is that if you sign the term sheet and it looks like a real paper that people are going to give you money, it means nothing. The investor can go away from the deal anytime. So the only way to actually know that you raised the money is to get the money in the bank. Until you get the money in the bank, whatever you signed, whatever the lawyers looked at, whatever hands you shook, doesn't matter. Like once you get the money in the bank, it's really hard to get them out. But before that, I've seen many times when signed agreements were just kind of like neglected and the money never reached the bank, so the company died. And if you have a demo is basically speaks 100 times better than any pitch, than any presentation. So if you can show the product, even if it's not finished, even if it's kind of like a basic concept, but you can go with your investors and tell them how it's going to work and how it basically solves the customer products, that speaks a lot louder than words. So thank you. That's all for me. Thank you.
Perfect.